The engine fire had stopped roaring only an hour ago, and already the silence felt worse than the noise. Daniel Reyes sat on a broken piece of metal that used to be part of his ship's hull, staring at the smoke rising from the wreck behind him. His hands were shaking, not from cold, but from the shock of still being alive. The survey ship had been thrown off course by a storm nobody predicted, and it had crashed hard into the side of a rocky hill on a planet that had no name in any human record. He was the only one who made it out. He did not know how long he sat there. Maybe minutes, maybe an hour. When he finally stood up, his legs felt weak, but his mind was already working. He needed shelter before night came, because the air here was thin and cold, and the sky had a strange purple color that made him uneasy. He walked away from the wreck, dragging a torn bag behind him. Inside it were a few tools, a half-empty water container, some ration bars, and one small paperback book he had packed as a joke before the mission started. His sister had given it to him, saying every long trip needs a good story. He had laughed at the time. Now it felt like the only piece of home he had left. As he walked, he noticed the land around him was strange. Tall black rocks stood in clusters, some as tall as buildings, and the ground had deep claw marks cut into the stone, like something huge had walked here many times. He told himself it was probably old erosion from wind and rain. He wanted to believe that. He did not want to think about what kind of creature could leave marks that size. By the time the sun started to set, Daniel found a cave carved into the side of a cliff. It was not deep, but it would block the wind, and that was enough for now. He crawled inside and dropped his bag on the ground. His body ached everywhere, but he was too tired to check for injuries. He just wanted to rest. Sleep did not come easily. Every sound outside made him tense up. The wind howled through the rocks in strange patterns, sometimes sounding almost like a voice. He sat with his back against the cave wall, knees pulled to his chest, listening to every creak and whisper of the world outside. He knew he needed rest, but fear kept his mind wide awake. After what felt like hours of lying still and doing nothing, Daniel reached into his bag out of habit. His fingers found the small book. He pulled it out and looked at the cover in the dim light of his wrist lamp. It was an old adventure story, nothing special, the kind of book people read for fun on long trips. He almost put it back. Then he thought about his sister's voice and the sound of her laughing when she gave it to him. He opened it to the first page. He began to read out loud. It felt strange at first, talking to no one in an empty cave on an empty planet. But something about hearing his own voice made the silence less frightening. The story was simple, about a group of travelers lost in a strange land, searching for a way home. Daniel found himself smiling slightly as he read, losing himself in the words instead of the fear. He did not know that outside, in the dark beyond the cave entrance, something was listening. It had heard him from far away, carried by the wind through the narrow canyon paths. It was not human. It was massive, covered in dark green scales that shimmered faintly under the two moons rising in the sky. Its eyes, large and golden, blinked slowly as it crouched low behind a rock formation, trying to understand the strange rhythmic sounds coming from the cave. This was Sable, a young dragon barely past her early years, still curious about the world in a way older dragons had long since lost. Sable had heard of humans before, mostly through warnings from the elders. Humans were dangerous, her kind said. Humans had come to this world before, with weapons and fire, hunting and destroying without understanding. The clan elders spoke of past battles, of dragons lost to human weapons, of trust broken long ago. Young dragons were taught to stay away from anything human, to attack first if one was ever found. But this sound was different. It did not sound like a threat. It sounded almost gentle, rising and falling like a song without music. Sable crept closer, careful to stay hidden, her claws barely making a sound against the stone. She wanted to understand what this human was doing, why he made these strange calm sounds instead of running or fighting. She reached a spot close enough to see him clearly. He was small compared to her, fragile-looking, sitting with his back against the wall of the cave, holding a small object in his hands. He was making the sounds himself, his mouth moving as his eyes moved across small markings on the object he held. It looked nothing like a weapon. It looked more like nothing she had seen before. Sable stayed there for a long while, listening, trying to piece together the meaning behind the sounds. She could not understand most of the words yet, only fragments picked up from old wreckage translators her clan had studied over generations. But she understood enough to know he was talking about a journey, about someone trying to find their way home. That was something she understood very well. As the night grew deeper, Daniel finally grew tired enough to stop reading. He closed the book gently and set it beside him, letting his eyes close for real sleep this time. He had no idea that just beyond the cave entrance, a massive golden eye was still watching him, filled with more curiosity than fear. Sable did not attack that night. She simply turned and slipped away into the darkness, thinking about the strange human and his strange, gentle sounds. She knew she should tell someone. She knew the elders would demand she report anything unusual near their territory. But for the first time in a long while, Sable found herself thinking about coming back the next night, just to listen a little more. 3 days passed before Daniel realized he was not alone on this planet, and by then, he had already grown used to the quiet routine of survival. He rationed his food carefully, checked his broken communicator every few hours hoping for a signal that never came, and spent his nights reading by the light of his wrist lamp, because reading kept his mind away from fear. He did not know that each night, a pair of golden eyes watched him from the shadows outside the cave. On the 4th night, something changed. Daniel was halfway through a chapter, describing a character crossing a dangerous river, when he heard a low rumbling sound from just outside the cave entrance. He froze, his heart pounding. Slowly, he lifted his eyes from the book and saw 2 large golden eyes staring back at him from the darkness. He nearly dropped the book. His first instinct was to run, but there was nowhere to run to. His second instinct was to grab whatever tool was nearest, though he knew a small wrench would do nothing against something with eyes that large. Instead, he sat frozen, waiting for the creature to make its move. The eyes did not move closer. They simply stayed there, watching him. After a long, tense silence, a deep voice spoke, slow and careful, as if forming words was still difficult. "Keep reading," the voice said. Daniel blinked, certain he had misheard. "What?" "The story," the voice said again. "What happens to the traveler at the river?" For a moment, Daniel could not process what was happening. A massive creature was hiding in the dark, asking him to continue a bedtime story. He almost laughed from the sheer strangeness of it, but fear kept the laugh trapped in his throat. "Are you going to hurt me?" he asked carefully. The eyes blinked slowly. "No, not yet. Not if story is good." Daniel did not know if that was meant as a joke or a real warning, but something about the tone did not feel threatening. It felt more like nervous curiosity, the same tone a shy person might use when trying to make conversation with a stranger. Slowly, cautiously, Sable stepped forward into the pale light of his wrist lamp. Daniel finally saw her clearly for the first time. Her scales were a deep shade of green, catching small sparks of light like polished stone, and her body, while young by dragon standards, was still far larger than anything he had ever stood near. 2 curved horns rose from her head, and her long tail curled behind her, flicking gently with what looked like nervous energy. Daniel's mind raced through every survival lesson he had ever learned, none of which had prepared him for a moment like this. But looking into her eyes, he saw something unexpected. Not hunger, not anger, just plain curiosity, maybe even loneliness. "You can talk," he said, still stunned. "A little," Sable admitted. "Old machines teach some words. Long ago." She tilted her head, studying him closely. "You are not like others. Others come with fire and metal. You only make sounds. Good sounds." Daniel realized she meant the stories. She had been listening to him read this whole time, maybe for days. The thought was strange, but strangely comforting too. If she only wanted stories, then maybe he was not in as much danger as he thought. "You've been listening to me read?" he asked. Sable nodded, an oddly human gesture for such an inhuman creature. "Every night. The words make pictures. In my head." She paused, searching for the right words. "Like the old tales my kind tell. But different. New." Daniel slowly lowered his guard, though his heart was still pounding. He studied her carefully, trying to understand the situation. A dragon, intelligent and capable of speech, sitting outside his cave, asking to hear more of his story instead of attacking him. It was almost too strange to believe, but it was happening. "If I keep reading," Daniel said carefully, testing the waters, "will you leave me alone? Not attack me?" Sable's tail flicked again. I will not hurt you, but others might not feel the same. Humans are not trusted here. Old fights, old pain. Her voice lowered, almost sad. My kind remembers. Daniel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air. He understood now that his survival depended on more than just food and shelter. There were other dragons out there, dangerous ones who might not care about stories at all. Then maybe we can help each other, Daniel offered, thinking quickly. I keep telling stories. You keep me hidden. Bring me food if you can. Deal. Sable considered this for a long moment, her golden eyes studying him carefully, as if weighing the honesty of his offer. Finally, she nodded once. Deal. But you must promise to finish the story. About the traveler. I want to know if he crosses the river. Despite everything, the fear, the danger, the impossible strangeness of the situation, Daniel felt a small, genuine smile form on his face. All right, sit down. I'll finish the chapter. Sable lowered herself carefully outside the cave entrance, curling her long body around the rocks, careful not to crush anything. Her large eyes locked onto Daniel with complete attention. For the first time since the crash, Daniel did not feel completely alone. He opened the book again and continued reading, his voice steady this time, no longer shaking from fear, but carried instead by the strange, fragile trust forming between a stranded human and a curious young dragon. Neither of them knew it yet, but this quiet moment in a cold, hidden cave was about to change everything for both of their worlds. A week passed, and Daniel's small paperback book finally reached its last page. He closed it slowly, almost sad to see the story end, and looked up to see Sable watching him with wide, expectant eyes. That's it, he said. That's the whole book. Sable's tail drooped slightly, an oddly emotional reaction for such a large creature. No more words. Daniel shook his head, then paused, thinking. He had grown up hearing stories from his grandfather, old tales passed down through his family, myths from different cultures on Earth, and countless movies and shows he had watched over the years. He realized the stories did not have to come from the book at all. I know other stories, he said. I can tell them from memory. Sable's eyes lit up instantly, golden light reflecting with pure excitement. Then tell them, please. And so began a new routine between them. Each night, once the twin moons rose high over the jagged black rocks, Sable would arrive at the cave entrance, and Daniel would tell a new story. Some nights, it was an old myth about brave heroes facing impossible odds. Other nights, it was a simple tale from his own childhood, about family, friendship, or mistakes he had learned from. He found that dragons, much like humans, seemed to love stories about courage, loss, and finding one's way home. It did not take long before Sable could not keep the secret to herself. She had 2 younger broodmates, restless and curious like she once was, and one night, she brought them along, hiding them behind the same rocks she used to hide behind. Daniel noticed the extra shapes in the darkness almost immediately. Sable, he said carefully, are those more of your kind? My brood, she admitted a little sheepish. They wanted to hear too. I told them about the human who speaks stories with feeling. Daniel felt a flash of fear at first. More dragons meant more risk, more chances of someone discovering him who was not as friendly as Sable. But when the 2 younger dragons peeked out from behind the rocks, their eyes wide with curiosity rather than hostility, his fear eased slightly. I suppose one story won't hurt, he said, and continued speaking, his voice carrying clearly into the night air. Word spread quickly after that. Young dragons, especially ones bored by old, repeated oral histories passed down from elders, found something new and exciting about Daniel's stories. Some nights, 5 or 6 young dragons gathered outside the cave, careful to stay quiet and hidden from the older, more suspicious members of their clans. Daniel began running out of memorized stories from Earth, so he started creating new ones, blending pieces of old myths with entirely new ideas, weaving in details about dragons themselves, giving them roles as heroes instead of monsters. The young dragons loved this especially. Being cast as brave characters instead of feared creatures gave them a strange, quiet pride. Daniel noticed how their expressions changed when a dragon character in his story showed wisdom or bravery. It was as if these young dragons had never imagined themselves as anything other than fighters bound to old rules and ancient grudges. But not everyone was pleased with this secret gathering. Older dragons, especially clan elders, began noticing their young disappearing at night, returning tired but strangely thoughtful. Whispers spread through the clan caves about strange behavior among the younger generation. Some elders suspected forbidden magic. Others feared something worse. One elder in particular grew deeply suspicious. Old Vantharus, the eldest and most respected elder of the mountain clans, had lived through the worst of the old wars between humans and dragons. He had seen friends and family lost to human weapons decades ago, and he trusted no human, no matter the circumstances. When he heard whispers of young dragons sneaking off toward the crash site every night, his suspicion turned into alarm. He said nothing at first, choosing instead to watch quietly, tracking the movements of the younger dragons from a distance. He followed Sable one night, staying far enough back to remain unseen, moving carefully through the narrow canyon paths toward the human's cave. What he found nearly stopped his heart. 6 young dragons, including his own great-grandnephew, sitting quietly around a small human, listening intently as the human spoke with animated hand gestures, telling some kind of tale. There was no fighting, no fear, just listening. Vantharus watched from the shadows for a long while, torn between fury and disbelief. Every part of his instinct told him to attack immediately, to protect the young from whatever trick this human might be playing. But something made him hesitate. The young dragons did not look tricked. They looked engaged, curious, even happy. Still, old wounds ran deep, and trust was not something Vantharus was willing to give easily. He turned and left quietly that night, deciding he needed time to think before acting. But he knew, deep down, that this secret would not remain hidden much longer. Back at the cave, unaware of the elder's silent visit, Daniel finished his story for the night to a chorus of soft, pleased rumbles from his young audience. Sable smiled in her own dragon way, her eyes half closed with contentment. "Same time tomorrow?" she asked. Daniel nodded, feeling a strange sense of purpose he had not expected to find on this cold, unfamiliar planet. Same time tomorrow. He had no idea that his simple habit of telling stories to survive the fear of being alone was slowly becoming something much bigger, something that would soon draw the attention of every dragon clan on the mountain, whether they wanted to listen or not. The morning after his secret visit to the cave, old Vantharus did not speak to anyone about what he had seen. He spent the day pacing along the high ridges of the mountain, his old wings dragging slightly with the weight of his thoughts. He kept remembering the sight of those young dragons sitting calmly, listening, trusting a human without fear. It went against everything he had taught them, everything his generation had suffered to learn the hard way. By nightfall, his patience had run out. He decided he would end this foolishness himself. Daniel was in the middle of a story that evening, describing a hero crossing a burning bridge to save his village, when a massive shadow fell over the cave entrance, blocking out the moonlight entirely. The young dragons around him froze instantly, their playful energy replaced by pure terror. Sable's eyes went wide with alarm. "Elder," she whispered, panic clear in her voice. Vantharus stepped forward, his enormous frame filling the entrance of the cave, his eyes burning with old anger and older pain. His voice, when it came, was low and dangerous. "So this is where you've been sneaking off to every night." Daniel's blood ran cold. Compared to Sable, who was already massive by human standards, Vantharus was enormous. Ancient scars crossing his dark scales, evidence of battles fought long before Daniel was even born. There was no mistaking the barely controlled fury radiating from him. "Elder Vantharus," Sable said quickly, stepping between Daniel and the old dragon. "Please, he means no harm. He only tells stories." "Stories," Vantharus repeated, his voice thick with disgust. "Humans do not tell stories out of kindness. They tell stories to manipulate, to distract, to weaken defenses before they strike." His golden eyes shifted toward Daniel, narrowing dangerously. "I have seen this trick before, small human. I have buried kin because of tricks like this." Daniel's hands were shaking, but he forced himself to remain calm, remembering everything he had read about dragons from Sable's own stories about her people. He understood now was not the time for panic, but for careful words. "I'm not tricking anyone," Daniel said, his voice steady despite his fear. "I'm stranded here, alone. I have no weapons, no ship, nothing. I only wanted company." So I started telling stories to keep myself from losing my mind in the dark. Vantharus's tail lashed sharply against the cave wall, sending small rocks tumbling down. Words. Only words. Humans are skilled at pretty words before the violence begins. The younger dragons whimpered slightly, pressing closer together, clearly terrified of the elder's rage. Sable, though visibly frightened herself, refused to back down. "Elder, please," she begged. "Give him a chance. Let him speak in front of the whole clan. If his stories mean nothing, if he truly means us harm, then decide what happens to him then. But do not judge him without truly listening first." Vantharus turned his sharp gaze towards Sable, clearly surprised by her boldness. For a long, tense moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the wind whistling through the canyon outside. Finally, Vantharus exhaled a slow breath of smoke through his nostrils, a sign of reluctant consideration rather than immediate rejection. "One story," he growled finally. "In front of the full clan gathering, 3 nights from now. If it moves nothing in me, if I sense even the smallest trick, he dies, and none of you will stop me. Do you understand?" Sable nodded quickly. "Understood, Elder." Vantharus turned his gaze back toward Daniel one final time before speaking his last warning. "Choose your words carefully, human. Your life depends on them." Without another word, the ancient dragon turned and disappeared into the night, leaving behind a heavy, fearful silence. Daniel let out a shaky breath he had not realized he was holding. The next 3 days passed in a blur of nervous preparation. Daniel barely slept, his mind constantly working through different story ideas, trying to think of something that would truly reach an audience of dragons who had suffered greatly at the hands of humans before. He knew a simple adventure tale would not be enough this time. He needed something deeper, something honest. Finally, on the 3rd night, Sable arrived to guide him through the mountain paths toward the great gathering cave, a massive cavern deep within the mountain where dozens of dragons from different clans had assembled, drawn by curiosity and the elder's unusual announcement. Daniel had never seen so many dragons in one place, their scales shimmering in shades of green, red, black, and silver under the torchlight embedded in the cave walls. Old Vantharus sat at the front, his expression unreadable, watching Daniel closely as he was led to the center of the gathering. Daniel's heart pounded as hundreds of golden and silver eyes turned toward him, waiting. He took a deep breath, remembering everything Sable had told him about dragon history, about old losses, about broken trust between 2 species who once shared this world uneasily. He decided not to tell a simple adventure story. Instead, he told the story of a lone traveler exiled from his homeland, wandering through unfamiliar lands, mistrusted by everyone he met, searching desperately for a place to belong. He wove in themes of loss, loneliness, and the slow, painful process of learning to trust again after being betrayed. He never mentioned dragons directly, but every dragon listening understood exactly what the story truly meant. By the time Daniel finished speaking, the massive cave was completely silent, the weight of unspoken understanding hanging heavily in the air. Even old Vantharus, hardened by decades of loss and mistrust, sat quietly for a long moment, his old eyes reflecting something Daniel had not expected to see: recognition, and perhaps the smallest flicker of understanding. "You may live, human," Vantharus finally said, his voice quieter than before. For now, it was not full trust, it was not forgiveness, but it was a beginning, and for the first time since crashing on this planet, Daniel felt like he might actually survive long enough to see what came next. News of the human who told stories powerful enough to silence old Vantharus spread across the mountain faster than any wind could carry it. Within days, dragons from clans Daniel had never even heard of began appearing near the gathering cave, curious to witness this strange event for themselves. What had once been a secret shared only among a handful of young dragons had grown into something impossible to hide any longer. At first, Daniel worried this attention would only bring more danger. But something unexpected began happening instead. Dragons who had once avoided each other, clans separated by generations of territorial disputes and old grudges, began arriving together, drawn by simple curiosity rather than conflict. For the first time and longer than most of them could remember, different clans sat side by side, waiting eagerly for nightfall and the promise of a new story. Counselor Orin, a dragon known throughout the mountain for his careful diplomacy and patient nature, watched this gathering with growing interest. Unlike Vantharus, Orin had spent years trying to ease tensions between rival clans, often without much success. Old wounds ran too deep, and pride made peace difficult to achieve through words alone. But here, in this strange nightly gathering around a small, ordinary human, something was shifting naturally, without force or negotiation. Rival clans sat together in silence, listening, briefly forgetting their disputes as they lost themselves in Daniel's stories. One evening, after Daniel finished telling a tale about two brothers from rival villages who slowly learned to trust each other again after years of conflict, Orin approached him directly, something he had never done before. "You may not realize what you are doing here, human," Orin said, his voice calm and thoughtful. Daniel, still catching his breath from the night's storytelling, looked up curiously. "I'm just telling stories, trying to survive." Orin's eyes narrowed slightly, though not with hostility. "Perhaps, but your stories carry more weight than you understand. For generations, we have tried to bring peace between clans through treaties, through careful words spoken in formal meetings. It has never worked completely. Old anger always finds its way back." He gestured toward the gathered dragons, many of whom belonged to clans that had fought bitter conflicts over territory and resources for decades. Yet here, listening to your tales, they forget their anger, if only for a short while. They see themselves reflected in your characters, their pain, their mistakes, their hope. This is something treaties alone could never accomplish. Daniel considered this carefully. He had never thought of his stories as anything more than a way to keep himself sane during a lonely, frightening time. The idea that they might actually be helping heal old wounds between entire clans felt both humbling and slightly overwhelming. "I'm not trying to change anything," Daniel admitted honestly. "I just wanted company, someone to talk to." Orin studied him for a long moment before responding. "Sometimes, the smallest intentions create the largest changes. Perhaps that is exactly why this is working. You are not trying to force peace. You are simply reminding us of what we already know, deep down, but have forgotten through years of conflict." As the days passed, Daniel's understanding of dragon culture deepened significantly. He learned about their oral traditions, ancient tales passed down through countless generations, stories meant to teach lessons about honor, sacrifice, and community. He began weaving elements of these old dragon tales into his own stories, blending human myths with dragon history, creating something entirely new that resonated deeply with his growing audience. Sable, who had become something close to a true friend by this point, often stayed after the nightly gatherings to help Daniel understand dragon customs better, correcting small misunderstandings and offering insight into how certain stories might land differently among various clans. "You are becoming one of us, in your own strange way," she told him one night, half joking but with clear affection in her voice. Daniel smiled at this, though he still felt the weight of his situation deeply. Despite the growing trust and friendship surrounding him, he was still far from home, still technically a survivor, stranded on an unfamiliar world. Each night, after the gatherings ended and the dragons returned to their respective territories, he would sit quietly by his small fire, wondering if any rescue would ever come, and if it did, what would happen to everything he had built here. Old Vantharus, though still cautious, gradually began attending the nightly gatherings as well, sitting quietly at the back, listening without interrupting. He never spoke directly to Daniel again after that first tense night, but his presence alone spoke volumes about how far trust had grown, even if grudgingly. One evening, as clans from opposite ends of the mountain sat together peacefully for the first time in living memory, Counselor Orin turned to Daniel with a thoughtful expression. "You have given us something valuable, human," he said quietly, "whether you intended to or not. You have shown us a path toward healing that none of our diplomats managed to find in years of careful negotiation." Daniel looked out over the gathered crowd, dragons of every size and color sitting peacefully together, listening intently to each new tale he offered. He thought about how strange his life had become, how a simple habit of reading aloud to fight loneliness had somehow grown into something far bigger than he ever imagined. He had no way of knowing that soon, his growing peace between clans would be tested in a way he never expected, as signals from beyond the sky finally answered the distress call his crashed ship had sent out weeks ago. A bright light streaked across the night sky, cutting through the darkness like a falling star that refused to burn out. Daniel noticed it first, pausing mid-sentence during one of his nightly stories, his eyes fixed on the distant glow descending toward the far side of the mountain range. The gathered dragons noticed his sudden silence and followed his gaze upward. "That is no ordinary star," Sable said quietly, tension creeping into her voice. Daniel's heart pounded with a mixture of hope and fear. After weeks of waiting, of wondering if anyone would ever come looking for him, a rescue ship had finally arrived. Yet standing among dragons who had only recently begun trusting humans again, he understood immediately what kind of danger this sudden arrival could bring. "That's a ship," Daniel said carefully. "A human ship." The reaction among the gathered dragons was immediate and tense. Low growls rippled through the crowd, old fears resurfacing instantly. Some younger dragons, who had grown comfortable with Daniel's presence, still tensed defensively, their training and instincts warning them of possible danger. Even Sable's easy trust wavered slightly, her muscles tightening. Old Vantharus rose slowly from his place at the back of the gathering, his expression hardening back into the wary elder Daniel had first encountered weeks ago. "Another human vessel," he said grimly. "History suggests this rarely ends peacefully." Daniel understood the fear immediately. Past encounters between humans and dragons had ended in violence, and now, with a new ship arriving without warning, old wounds threatened to reopen before any lasting peace could truly take hold. He needed to act quickly, before fear turned into another cycle of conflict. "Let me go to them first," Daniel said urgently. "Let me explain the situation before anyone does anything they'll regret." Vantharus studied him carefully, clearly torn between newfound trust and decades of ingrained caution. "And if they attack regardless of your words?" Daniel took a steadying breath. "Then at least I will have tried to prevent bloodshed on both sides." After a tense discussion among the dragon elders, it was agreed that Daniel would travel toward the landing site accompanied by Sable and a small group of dragons, staying hidden until Daniel could safely make contact with the rescue crew alone first. Orin, ever the diplomat, insisted on this cautious approach, hoping to avoid triggering immediate hostility from either side. The journey to the crash site took most of the night. By the time Daniel arrived, the rescue ship's crew had already begun setting up temporary scanning equipment, searching for any sign of survivors from the original crashed vessel. When they spotted Daniel emerging alone from the tree line, exhausted but alive, relief washed over their faces immediately. "We thought you were dead," the rescue captain said, stepping forward quickly to check on him. Sensors picked up unusual energy readings across this region. Command was worried about hostile alien life. Daniel hesitated only briefly before deciding honesty was his best option. "There is intelligent life here. Dragons. And they're not hostile, not unless we give them a reason to be." The captain's expression shifted from relief to cautious alarm. "Dragons? Are you certain they're intelligent?" "More than certain," Daniel said firmly. "I've spent weeks living among them. They speak, they think, they have culture, history, even art in their own way. If your crew reacts with weapons first, you will destroy any chance of peaceful contact, and possibly get us all killed in the process." The captain studied Daniel closely, clearly uncertain how to process such an unusual claim. Sensing his hesitation, Daniel made a decision that could either save everything he had built or destroy it completely. "Let me show you," he said. "Let me bring them here myself, peacefully. Give me one chance before your crew does anything defensive." After a tense discussion among the ship's small crew, the captain reluctantly agreed to a short window of peaceful contact, though he made it clear his crew would remain armed and cautious throughout. Daniel returned to where Sable and the others waited nearby, quickly explaining the situation. Sable, though nervous, nodded firmly. "We trust you, Daniel. Lead the way." Together, they approached the human camp slowly, dragons moving cautiously but without aggression, wings lowered in a clear display of peaceful intent that Daniel had learned about during his time among them. The human crew watched nervously, weapons ready but not raised, as several massive dragons approached alongside the man they had come to rescue. Daniel stepped forward first, standing between both groups, fully aware that a single wrong move from either side could ignite a conflict neither species could easily walk back from. "These are not monsters," Daniel said loudly, addressing the human crew directly. "They are a people, just like us, with their own history, their own losses, and their own hopes for peace. And he turned toward the dragons, are not facing enemies here. Only people who came looking for someone they thought they had lost." A long, tense silence followed, both sides watching each other carefully, neither willing to make the first move. Then, slowly, Sable stepped forward, lowering her head respectfully toward the human captain, a gesture Daniel had taught her carried meaning among humans as a sign of peaceful greeting. The captain, though visibly nervous, mirrored the gesture cautiously, lowering his weapon slightly as a sign of good faith. Slowly, hesitantly, both groups began to relax, tension easing as understanding replaced fear for the first time in generations. In the days that followed, careful negotiations began between the human rescue crew and Dragon Clan leaders, with Daniel serving as translator and mediator between both worlds. It was slow, delicate work, built on small moments of trust rather than grand gestures, much like the simple stories that had started everything weeks ago in a cold, lonely cave. When the time finally came for the rescue ship to consider its return journey home, Daniel found himself facing an unexpected choice. He could return to human space, back to family, familiar comforts, and the life he once knew. Or he could stay here, on this strange, beautiful world, continuing the fragile peace he had helped build between two very different peoples. Standing beside Sable one final evening, watching dragons and humans sit together peacefully around a shared fire for the first time in history, Daniel realized his answer had already been decided weeks ago, somewhere between the pages of an old paperback book and the golden, curious eyes of a young dragon who simply wanted to hear what happened next. He chose to stay, becoming the first official bridge between two worlds, continuing the nightly gatherings that had once been a secret survival habit and had grown into the foundation of a lasting peace. And every night, as twin moons rose over the mountain, dragons both young and old gathered once more, not out of fear or duty, but simply to listen, reminded again and again that even the smallest stories carry the power to change everything.